Good morning. Sara and I have both made successful transitions across types of libraries and across different specialties within library science. And we both think that there are opportunities that a lot of librarians miss out on because they aren't confident that they could make a big transition of those types or across big specialty changes. And in fact, we felt so strongly about it that we wrote a book that was published by Routledge during the pandemic. And we're going to share some insights from the book today, along with some insights from having served on an awful lot of search committees, to give you some ideas about how a career change could work for you. So we surveyed thousands of librarians about the transitions that they made within their library careers. And one of the big things that came out of it was that more than half said skills transfer easily. So one mental adjustment that you could make if you're thinking about making a big transition is to think of yourself in terms of the skills and the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you have, rather than thinking of yourself in terms of your current job title. And then when you start looking at the new job opportunities, think about how your skills and knowledge could be adapted. So, for instance, quite a few of our survey comments talked about how important it is to be adaptable and creative in reimagining how your skills could translate to a new position. So, for instance, if you're a vendor and that's just not going to work. If you're a vendor and you're used to crafting a proposal to try to sell something to a library, if you want to move to become, say, an acquisitions librarian, think about how you could reimagine that skill set to consider what you would be willing to accept in an offer, or how you would best negotiate based on the skill set that you've got now for making the offer and negotiating. How could you turn that around and do it in reverse? Another thing that some of our readers have expressed that they've liked is our discussion of the emotional components in switching jobs, or even in thinking about it. Because making a big career change can be an identity change, and it's important to check in with yourself about that, to use your support system, or to work on developing one. Having support, reading about other librarians who have made successful changes, successful transitions, has been a big help to some of our readers. We had feedback from somebody whose eyes were open, that they could make a change across types and move up to becoming a dean, something that they had never thought they could do, just because that possibility had never occurred to them before. It bolstered her confidence to go for the job, and she got it. Another reader liked practical suggestions for thinking through why you want to change. What is pushing you out of where you currently are? What is pulling you towards something new? Think about what is appealing about different kinds of environments, because what you want now may be very different than what you wanted when you started out. Another thing to think about is that there can be a very emotional component to applying for jobs and opening yourself up to being judged and being questioned. And that's definitely something to be ready for. Now I'm going to turn things over to Sara.
All right, hello. So let's talk about it from the acquisitions perspective. So I assume a lot of you are acquisitions people, but we've had colleagues that are not in acquisitions attend this conference frequently. So we thought we'd put this in here in case there are people who are thinking about moving into acquisitions, or if you have colleagues who are thinking about moving into acquisitions. Some of this will seem like, yes, of course you should do this, but we have found through being on many search committees that people do need to be told these things, that it is not always, especially when you're applying for jobs, it is very easy to get bogged down and kind of miss out on common sense things. So if you want to move into acquisitions work, I'm not going to go through all of these in the interest of time and your sanity, but we just kind of brainstormed a few things that, people who don't necessarily have acquisitions experience might have these skills, and these are good skills to highlight if you're going to move into acquisitions, and to really be explicit, hey, I have this, I've done this. So from the many, many, many search committees that Tina and I have been on, we have found a few things that people, we really wish they would do. And the first is really read the job ad. It's been a little surprising to us, so probably you've experienced this as well. Not everyone reads the job ad, and sometimes they really need to. So, so really know the job you're applying to. Make no assumptions about the search committee. Do not assume that we know the library you're coming from or the job that you've done. You need to really be explicit and connect the dots for the search committee. Your cover letter is your chance to really highlight your specific experience and really why you're a good fit for this job. There are a few things you can do to prepare yourself, like join listservs, attend conference sessions, good job, and talk to people who have the job that you want. All right, well, thank you very much. A small plug for our book. Honestly, we have not made any money from this book, so you can probably get it from your library. But if you're interested in reading more, there's a book. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for being here. Welcome to Publishing Without Publishing, and thank you to my colleagues, Raquel, Estrada, and Flores, who are here this morning. We're going to move quickly through these 20 slides. So the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley is located at the southern tip of Texas, deep South Texas, on the border with Mexico. Our Brownsville campus, you can see there, is adjacent to the border wall. We are a Hispanic Serving Institute, and we enrolled 32,000 students this fall. So here's our agenda today. I'm glad to hear words like community and reimagining, because we'll be getting into that a little bit. I want to explain to you how we have had to reimagine our exhibits and our book displays so that we can present those in the virtual space, and that's what I'll be talking about. Publishing Without Publishing is basically scholarly communication. That's where I'm heading with this. And I wanted to draw your attention to these words highlighted in color because, we all kind of have our ideas about what ScholComm is, scholarly communication, but this is how I'm defining it. And this is how I'm saying that our poster exhibits and displays fit within scholarly communication. We are looking at the resources we have available to us, and we're reimagining those and presenting them to our community. So you probably remember when we were all forced to be at home, work from home, study from home. We missed out on engaging with one another, but more importantly, we missed out with engaging with our students and our faculty. And so in special collections, you can imagine that our exhibits were something we were missing out on. And even just the physical experience of engaging with books in the library. And so Raquel was trying to think of how she could draw attention to new titles, or how could she highlight those things related to a specific theme, like you might see traditionally. And in special collections, I was thinking about how do I present all these things on the left that you might see in a case or a vitrine in a way that people could still engage and access them online to learn about our special collections and archives. So here's the recipe. It's pretty easy. You're just going to need a design platform, any one that you're comfortable with, a publishing platform, whatever's already available to you, and what you're really going to need is just some creativity, a sprinkle of skill, and I always recommend QR codes these days. So survey what you have. Think about what's available on a given topic as you're compiling these resources. Use your preferred platform. So just make sure it's something where you can incorporate a lot of visual interest, because people are visual learners sometimes. As you're compiling these resources, you want an array of things, right? So this is really an opportunity to show all the different types of materials your library has available. These are what we selected for Black History Month. We've got streaming, we've got maps, we've got books, manuscripts. In your poster design, use what you're comfortable with. We use Canva because we use it because it's free. And there's a lot of templates, so it's really easy to get started. And just know that you're not reinventing the wheel, right? If you see something you like, use that and modify it for your own purposes. And then here are some examples of what we did. So this is a book display poster for Women's History Month. We've got books here, ebooks, physical books, and juvenile books. And then this is a poster exhibit that I did for Women's History Month. And you can see, even though there's a lot of text on 3 of these posters, there's still visual interest that will engage people. And then publish online. Now, some of these platforms allow you to publish directly online. Canva does, Adobe Express does. We choose to create PDFs and use our institutional repository, bpress, and we publish them to ScholarWorks. And what's great about that is we can track usage. Now, you can probably do that in other social media platforms as well to track your reach. But this is really good because you want to know who's using it, who's downloading it. You want to know how they're getting to your site. Here you can see that our intended audience was local, right there in the southern tip of Texas. But we actually were able to engage with people in other parts of the United States and then in other parts of the world for one particular poster exhibit. And so you can see across time how you're growing that community as well. And then you're learning things about them. How are they finding you? Are they getting there directly from a link? Or are they going to Google Scholar? Are they just going to Google? How are they getting to your particular publications? And then lastly, I just want to say that it is a poster. So, you can print them out, you can hang them up. The virtual world is not exclusive of the physical world. And once we got kids back on campus and back in our building, we drew the attention of the student newspaper who could share these. So thank you so much. Give posters a chance. These up. This is our Vaqueros school spirit tradition. So thank you.
So I do not have slides. Sorry. Not that sorry. So hi, I am Tasha Mellins-Cohen. I am the project director at Counter. I've been renamed She Who Counts this week. So first question for everybody in the room, rather than you asking me. Who thinks Counter is only for subscription content? Hands up. Really? Okay, that's good. I'm pleased it's not more, because Counter is not just for subscription content. It is where we came from, for the mid-90s, late 90s, when publishers started shifting their content online. Libraries wanted a way to assess the value of their digital subscriptions, and therefore publishers and libraries collaborated to produce Counter, which is the industry standard for usage metrics. And historically, that very much focused on institution level reporting, and it focused on subscription content. And it's now 2022, and there is less and less subscription content, more and more open content that can be read and used and remixed by anybody, regardless of whether or not they are affiliated with an institution. During the early part of the pandemic in 2020, we saw, while I was still working for the Microbiology Society, a 300% increase in usage in the week after we dropped our paywall, and less than 2% of that could be associated with a university. So, very briefly, Counter was used to calculate cost per download. The single most common question that I receive as Counter's project director is, which metric should I use to calculate cost per download? It's the unique item requests for everything that isn't a book, in which case you want the unique title requests. I don't want to get into cost per download because I am actually here to talk about impact. So we all want to measure impact. Funders in particular want evidence of the impact of the work that they have paid to have done in terms of research, and often that they have paid to have published under an open access model. Institutions also want to know what the impact is of the work that their authors, their researchers are delivering. And you can talk about impact as being impact on research, so academic impact, or it could be societal. Lovely. I hope many of you were in the room yesterday when Daniel Hook was talking about how we really need qualitative measures of impact. We are human. We like numbers. They make things nice and easy. And therefore, we've historically used citations, and we've used more recently altmetric. Citations are fantastic. They are very, very direct. An individual researcher has read and found a piece of content useful and wants to cite it. It can take decades for citations to accrue, so it's not very immediate. Altmetric, by contrast, is quite fleeting attention. It's not necessarily showing high altmetric score that you have a long-term impact on a piece of scholarship, through a piece of scholarship. Now I argue, and I would say this because I am she who counts, that usage is a third measure of impact. It's only ever going to be a proxy, just as citations and altmetrics are, but usage accrues from the day of publication. It's very immediate, unlike citations, and it's much more direct than altmetrics. If somebody has actually gone to the trouble of downloading a piece of content, either as an EPUB file or a PDF or whatever, it's much more than just hitting retweet, because hands up if you, like me, have just retweeted something and not read the article. Now, again, great, but countermetrics are institutional, right? Since 2019, with the release of Counter 5, we have included the concept of global metrics. So that is the total usage of any given article or book or database record by any user anywhere in the world, regardless of whether or not they are affiliated with an institution. And that global usage, admittedly, is usage on the publisher's platform or the repository. It's not aggregated from across the web. That is my dim and distant dream. But it is a really good starting point to sit alongside badges for citations and altmetrics to say this is the audited, trusted, guaranteed, actual global usage of this piece of research. Now, in order to make that happen, Counter really needs to get on the road with some better education and driving, understanding, and creating demand for these kinds of global level usage metrics. So I've been speaking with funders, I've been speaking with institutions, I'm speaking to you guys here today. I would very much encourage all of you to be pushing your publishers to show global usage metrics. But I would say, as with all metrics, please use responsibly. That's it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to talk with you about a process mapping and improvement project that we undertook at Appalachian State University. We undertook it with regards to our electronic resources renewals, but I do want to stress that process mapping is a methodology that can be applied to any process in your library. So this is the specific way we used it, but you can use it really any place in your library. So what led us to start this project and this process? Well, we felt like we had some issues with our electronic resource renewal process. These are some of the things, and this probably might again sound familiar to some other processes in your library as well. We found out the process was inefficient and ineffective. We really were struggling with it intersecting with larger university procurement and legal infrastructure, which can be time-consuming and cumbersome. Unclear roles and responsibilities. This is something that crossed over 2 teams, so that did not make it any easier. Our existing process really didn't facilitate transparency and collaboration around decision-making, and it really lacked documentation and of our decisions and justifications and things like that. So what is process mapping? It's kind of what it sounds like. It is basically capturing the current as-is business process. So process mapping usually results in a process map, which is a visual display of the steps within a business process showing how it's done from start to finish. I don't have time here today to speak too much about the technical aspects of process mapping. There's lots of resources online. You can find those things. What I want to talk about is more kind of big picture if you're thinking about undertaking something like this in your library, and also talk a little about some of the nuances that are just you don't find written about so much in the literature, but you discover once you experience them. So I kind of think of process mapping in 3 phases. So before the mapping, and then after the mapping. Before the mapping, so this is before you actually start collecting any data and start your mapping process. These are some really important things to think about. If you're doing a process improvement project, it probably means that your process is not meeting needs. But there are people involved with that process. So when you launch something like a process mapping project, people are going to have some feelings about it. Some are going to be positive, some are going to be negative, and so you just really need to think about that. So first of all, it's important to have project sponsorship. I recommend you have it as high in your organization as you can get it. And also when you're rolling out this kind of a project, again, keep in mind and be sensitive and aware of people's feelings around a project like this. You should clearly scope the process. So as we know, our processes have sub-processes and related processes. And so you really want to be very careful about scoping the process that you're going to do. Otherwise, you're going to have scope creep and you're going to be mapping every process under the sun. So just be very clear about that. Another thing to do is clearly set your project deliverables. So are you just going to create a map, a process map, or are you going to create a process map with improvement recommendations? So just be very clear because your deliverable is going to drive your work. So you kind of want to know that ahead of time. So you want to identify all those involved in the process to be mapped. So these are going to be your stakeholders. But keep in mind, your stakeholders might not just be the people involved in the process. It might be kind of your customers of your process, if you will. So you're going to want to kind of try to identify as many of those people ahead of time as possible. Data collection. This is huge. This is before you get to the mapping. Really think about your process. So how you're going to capture data, what kind of data you're going to capture. Your protections. Are you going to anonymize your data? Are you going to identify people in your data? And then permissions. Who's going to be able to see your raw data versus who might see just a report at the end. It's really important. I highly recommend you make these decisions before you start collecting the data, because once you try to go afterwards, it gets much more complicated. And then communication. Who's going to communicate out throughout the process and what's your timing of that? As with most of these projects, I would recommend communicating as often as possible, but try to determine that before you get started. The mapping process itself. So the first thing is you're going to collect data. It can be qualitative data through observations, interviews, surveys. It can be quantitative data. In a case like this, it would be turnaround times, missed renewals, things like that. If you have any existing policies or procedures, review all of those as part of this process. And one thing to keep in mind is this is going to be a very iterative process. You're going to start to talking to people, you're going to learn something, then you're going to go back and you're going to talk to the people. So you want to know it's going to be iterative, and you want it to be iterative because actually you want to make sure you're checking back in with people to see if you're getting it right as you're documenting these processes. Depending on the type of data, you're going to now analyze that data, and then you're going to create your documentation. For me, it's typically a narrative and a map, but it might just be a map, it might be something else for you. So that's really the mapping process. So these are a couple of very quick examples. On the left side, that's a very simple workflow map. Again, I'm not going to get into all the symbols. On the right, that's a swim lane map, so that's great for cross-functional kinds of processes. But that's probably going to be at least one of the deliverables that you're going to come up with. And then after the mapping. So this is after you've got all your deliverables. First thing to keep in mind is how are you going to disseminate those deliverables? How are you going to get those out to people? And if there's going to be interpretation needed for those, because not everyone's going to be familiar with process maps, how are you going to help people interpret it and understand the data that you're sending out? Your next steps, because everyone wants to know what's the next step? Well, that's going to depend on your deliverables. If you just have a map, your next steps are probably going to be process improvement recommendations. If you have a map and process improvement recommendations, you're probably going to want to vet those recommendations with folks. So it's going to kind of depend on what steps you take. And then, of course, the whole goal of this process is implementing process improvements. So you're going to want to go through that whole implementation process and then kind of report back and close that loop. So that's it.
Many thanks to all of our speakers who did so well sharing their thoughts and ideas in 6 minutes apiece. So congratulations. Now's our Q&A time. I think we've got about 10 or 15 minutes. I should know when this session ends, but I don't. But we have some time for Q&A. I am going to ask I'm going to ask if you have questions, let me know who it's from, and I'm going to ask them to come up to the mic so that everybody can hear them. And we'll probably repeat questions just to make sure that everybody hears them. So does anybody have questions?
So the process mapping thing. We are a really small library. We're a prep school too, but we're like a small college. But we subscribe to like 75 different things database-wise. And I think the reason that I struggle is not necessarily because of my process, but it's because every database company wants to do it differently, just like they do database statistics. I love the counter person, except for the fact that we have so many databases that either don't use counter or we are struggling to try to put up. So I think what I'm trying to figure out is how to remain sane and organized with not only renewals but payment when I have 10 different companies doing things almost 10 different ways. So do you have any advice on that field?
So that's a very so this is your challenge there is, again, you're working within these kind of external processes and external systems.
Yeah.
And then where does it meet your internal process and your internal systems?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did is just trying to anticipate those kinds of things. Where you're going to have the gaps from something that's coming from a vendor, where are you going to be able to kind of bolster your process to kind of meet those gaps. I mean, the reality is sometimes there's just external things that there's nothing you can do about. Like for us, procurement and legal on campus is something we can do nothing about, right? We have no control of that. We just have to work within the constraints that we have in those systems. So we're just trying to optimize our processes internally so that we can deal with how much time it takes, how much back and forth and things like that, and anticipate it. So this isn't probably be a very satisfying answer to your questions, and I apologize to that, but I would just say anything where you can identify those gaps, if you can identify where places in your timeline where you know it's going to bog down and try to work ahead of those things, that's probably about the best you can do, unless you can influence. If you can influence the external folks to try to get it to be a little bit more aligned with your processes, I would obviously advocate for that. But otherwise, I just think being able to identify those situations and then be able to respond as much as possible with your internal is probably about the best you can do.
And I assume I'm not alone in this. We all do database renewals, right? And they're makes you a little crazy, right? Yeah, okay. I just feel better. It feels like, Librarians Anonymous. I'm here to feel better about the fact that everybody's struggling with it.
Yes.
Thank you.
By the way, we go to 10:10. I just looked it up. So 10:10.
I do feel your pain because counter staffing is 20 hours a week of me, and so far I've got 17 different library formats that they want bills in. So thanks, guys. But actually, the question on getting counter reports from databases that may or may not currently deliver them, if you come across publishers who aren't giving you counter reports, please let me know because I can start bringing some pressure to bear on them. But if I don't know that they exist, I can't fix anything. So please do message me when you come across those guys. I can't promise anything, but we're working on it.
I have a question for Dr. Counter too. You mentioned the global metrics for title level. Do you know of any publishers who have made any of this public yet?
So PLOS was the first group that picked up global level usage metrics. They are working with a group called LibLinks, so all other LibLinks customers could also deliver those. There are certainly other publishers who are working on global metrics, but mostly at the moment they are only giving them to customers. So they're not necessarily making those global metrics openly available. That's the next conversation to be had. I'm sort of holding it a little bit for when 5.1 comes out the door, because 5.1 is much better for open access. We spent months working on our open access definitions.
Thank you.
Yes, actually, I was going to ask for clarification on counter. So right now, there might be some publishers. That's okay. So there are some publishers who might be able to provide that data, but we shouldn't expect to go looking for other active sites. Is that what I'm hearing?
So we have been encouraging publishers to deliver global metrics since 2019. They are not necessarily promoting the fact that they have them. I think a lot of publishers are still trying to work out how to get the best bang for their buck, I suppose, in delivering global metrics. The more libraries ask for these things, the more publishers are going to make them much more publicly available. So, bring pressure to bear.
Good point. Thank you. And then I have a quick question for Meredith.
Yep, absolutely.
Do you have any recommended software for your process mapping?
So for is your question about the creation of the actual map?
The actual map, like I've tried using Visio.
Yeah, Visio it has a pretty steep learning curve. I've done this enough that I do use Visio, but you can use PowerPoint. I mean, you're basically using a lot of boxes and arrows and things like that. So you can probably maybe even do it in Word. With some of that drawing and capability. Visio is obviously built for workflows, so it's going to it's going to be the most robust software for it. But if you don't want to invest that learning curve and you literally just need a map, there's some other ones that I would use, like PowerPoint.
I was going to add Google Images is a great way to go, in particular because you can share it. It makes it very easy to create them and share them, and they live in the cloud, so you're not worrying about transferring a file and making those visible. So we use Google quite a bit for shared procedural documents, so when we're documenting a process or a procedure, and I think that would make a great, excellent tool. So Google Images or Google Slides, but Google Images gives you a larger screen to work with. Other questions? So I have a quick question for Tasha. Is there a way, so let's say that my institution does not, or the publisher doesn't provide global usage, is there a way a user can go to direct to counter and say what my usage is? Like find that out?
Okay, so we develop the standard. We do not store or aggregate or collect usage metrics. We do answer a lot of questions about them, but no, we don't collect anything. Long term, I think that would probably be a valuable thing for us to explore, but there are many steps between here and there.
Any more questions? We have 4 minutes. You can probably take another couple. I'm gonna talk to the folks at Rio Grande Valley. In terms of, I know that you mentioned in your presentation to pick a platform for the posters that you created. Was there a particular software that you guys found particularly useful or helpful in generating that visual content?
We use Canva because it's free and there's a ton of built-in templates and it can collaborate. So I can share a Canva design and we can add to it, add content to it, and revise it and reuse it. Because that's the thing is once you're creating these visual, if you're scanning materials, for example, for special collections, you want to reuse them, they are maintained in your file upload gallery, so you can just reuse and remix things. So that's what I recommend. And you can publish directly from Canva. To any social media, Twitter, Instagram, and it does have some interactive tools for viewers, but like I said, we prefer to use the PDF so we can track things on our IR. But you could use PowerPoint, use what you're comfortable with. Don't learn something new just for the sake of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, do we have any other questions from the group? All right, well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you again to all of our presenters for excellent work today.